The journey was long, but we arrive. Indeed, the scholars will welcome our knowledge.
And their archives, what of them?
They are vast. Our discussions will be fruitful.
In the early years of the 14th century in West Africa, there existed a powerful empire that many outside the region did not fully understand. This empire was known as the Mali Empire, and its land stretched across areas that today include Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and parts of Niger. It was not built in a single moment. It grew slowly, shaped by trade, leadership, and control of valuable resources. At the heart of this empire was the city of Niani, located in what is now modern-day Mali. This city served as the center of political power, where decisions were made and authority was established. From here, the empire extended its influence across vast lands, connecting regions through trade routes that crossed deserts and rivers. One of the most important elements of the Mali Empire was its control over gold. In a time when gold was one of the most valuable resources in the world, this empire held a significant portion of it. Traders traveled long distances, crossing the Sahara Desert to reach the markets controlled by Mali. These journeys were not easy; they were dangerous, long, and uncertain, but the reward was worth the risk. The wealth of the Mali Empire was not hidden; it was known, but not fully understood. And as news of this wealth began to spread beyond Africa, it started to attract attention from distant lands, attention that would change everything. In the year 1312, a man came to power in the Mali Empire who would change its history forever. His name was Mansa Musa. He ruled from Niani in present-day Mali, and under his leadership, the empire reached its greatest height. Mansa Musa was not just a ruler, he was a symbol of wealth and authority. His control over gold made him one of the richest individuals in history, but his power was not based only on wealth. It was also based on organization, leadership, and a clear understanding of how to manage a large empire. Under his rule, the Mali Empire expanded, trade routes became more organized, cities grew stronger. The empire became a center of activity, attracting traders, scholars, and travelers from different regions. It was no longer just a regional power, it had become a global force. But with such power came responsibility. Managing such a large and wealthy empire was not simple. It required constant attention. It required decisions that could affect thousands of people, and it required a vision that could guide the empire forward. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa made a decision that would change how the world saw the Mali Empire. He began a journey from Niani in Mali to Mecca in present-day Saudi Arabia. This journey, known as the Hajj, was not unusual for a Muslim ruler, but the way he traveled was unlike anything seen before. As he moved across the Sahara Desert and into North Africa, he was accompanied by a large group of people. Soldiers, attendants, and servants traveled with him. They carried supplies, animals, and something else: gold, large amounts of gold. When Mansa Musa reached cities such as Cairo in Egypt, his presence had a powerful effect. He distributed gold generously. He gave it to people, to leaders, to traders. The amount of gold he brought was so large that it affected the economy of the region. People in Cairo, in Egypt, spoke about his wealth with amazement. News of his journey spread quickly. It reached places far beyond Africa, and for many, this was the first time they truly understood the power of the Mali Empire. At the same time, the Mali Empire was not just growing in wealth, it was also growing in knowledge. Cities like Timbuktu, located in present-day Mali, became centers of learning and culture. Scholars traveled there to study, to teach, and to exchange ideas. Timbuktu was not just a city of trade, it was a city of knowledge. Libraries were built, books were collected. Education became an important part of the empire. This made the Mali Empire not just wealthy but also intellectually strong. Trade continued to play a major role. Goods such as gold and salt moved across the Sahara Desert. Caravans traveled long distances, connecting the Mali Empire with North Africa and beyond. These trade routes were carefully controlled. The organization of these systems showed something important. The Mali Empire was not powerful by accident. It was powerful because of planning, structure, and understanding. It was a system that worked, and it worked well. As the wealth and influence of the Mali Empire grew, so did the attention it received. Traders from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East became more interested in this powerful empire. They wanted to understand it. They wanted to connect with it. Maps created in distant lands began to include the Mali Empire. Stories about its wealth spread across regions. The name of Mansa Musa became known far beyond Africa. His journey had made sure of that. But attention can bring both opportunity and challenge. As more people became aware of the empire, more interest followed. And not all interest is harmless. Some come to trade, others come for different reasons. The Mali Empire stood strong, but history has shown that when power becomes visible, it begins to face new kinds of pressure, and what comes next would test whether that power could last. After the famous journey of Mansa Musa in the year 1324, the Mali Empire reached a level of recognition that few empires in Africa had ever achieved. From Niani in present-day Mali to Cairo in Egypt, and even beyond into parts of Europe, the name of the empire became known. But recognition brings pressure, and pressure brings change. When Mansa Musa returned from Mecca in present-day Saudi Arabia, he focused on strengthening the empire from within. He invested in cities like Timbuktu and Gao, both located in present-day Mali. These cities became even more important as centers of trade and learning. Mosques were built, scholars were invited, knowledge became a key part of the empire's identity. But maintaining such a large empire required constant effort. The land stretched across vast distances. Communication was not always fast. Local leaders had to manage their regions while still following the authority of the central government in Niani. This system worked, but it required strong leadership. As time passed, the question began to grow. What would happen after Mansa Musa? Who would be able to maintain this level of control? And could the empire continue to grow without the same level of leadership that had brought it to its peak? After the death of Mansa Musa, which took place around the year 1337 in the Mali Empire, leadership began to change. New rulers came into power, but not all of them had the same strength of vision. This created uncertainty. In Niani, in present-day Mali, the center of power remained active, but the control over distant regions began to weaken. Some areas started to act more independently. Local leaders gained more influence, and the unity that once defined the empire began to shift. At the same time, trade routes started to change. New paths were discovered across West Africa. Some traders began to avoid certain routes controlled by Mali. This reduced the flow of wealth that had once been consistent and strong. These changes did not destroy the empire immediately. The Mali Empire was still powerful, but the signs of change were clear. The balance that had kept everything stable was beginning to move. While internal challenges were growing, external pressures also began to increase. New powers in West Africa started to rise. One of the most important of these was the Songhai Empire, centered around the city of Gao in present-day Mali. By the late 14th century and into the early 15th century, Songhai began to expand its influence. It focused on controlling trade routes along the Niger River. These roads were important for the movement of goods and resources. As Songhai grew stronger, it began to challenge the control of the Mali Empire. Areas that were once under Mali's authority became contested. Control over trade, which had been a major source of power, was no longer secure. This created a new situation. The Mali Empire was no longer the only dominant power in the region. It now had to compete, and competition brought new risks that the empire had not faced before. By the early 15th century, around the year 1400, the Mali Empire was still present, but it was no longer at its peak. Its influence had reduced, its control over trade had weakened, and its ability to manage distant regions had become more difficult. Cities like Timbuktu and Gao continued to be important, but their connection to central authority in Niani was not as strong as before. Local leadership became more important, and central control became less effective. Trade still existed, but it was not as dominant as it had once been. Other regions began to take part in the movement of goods. The wealth that once defined the Mali Empire was now shared across different powers. This decline was not sudden, it happened slowly. Over time, and for many people living in the empire, it did not feel like a single event. It felt like a gradual change in the world around them. Even as the Mali Empire declined, its impact did not disappear. Its influence remained in the systems it created, the cities it developed, and the knowledge it supported. Timbuktu continued to be a center of learning. Trade networks continued to connect regions. The story of Mansa Musa remained one of the most powerful examples of wealth and influence in history. His journey in 1324 from Niani to Mecca through Cairo showed the world what was possible. It changed how Africa was seen by others. The Mali Empire also showed something important. That power is not only about resources, it is about how those resources are managed. It is about leadership, it is about structure, and it is about the ability to adapt to change. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: no empire remains at its peak forever, but the impact it leaves behind can last far longer than its time of power. The Mali Empire may have declined, but its story continues to shape how we understand history today.